Hey guys, Greg Howe, S9 Radio here. This is the kind of video I really hate to have to do. However, I'm doing this for an owner. Had this really clean Browning Mark II. Paid to have it restored. So listen to how horrible this sounds. Totally distorted. They're on frequency, by the way. Is that awful or what? But for starters, most of the tubes are 50-year-old original Browning tubes. Yeah. And speaking of old tubes, I have one of the worst tubes, I'm not going to say ever made, because this outfit, Lindell, does not make tubes. They buy seconds and rejects from major manufacturers, and then they put their own name on it, Lindell. So bottom line, when purchasing a Lindell branded or box tube, you never really knew what you were getting. Pretty sad. Not only do we have old tubes in his transmitter, it doesn't look like the relay's been serviced. I'm not seeing any marks indicating the cover had been popped. Once again, this was supposed to have been completely restored. Now, anybody that knows old tube radios knows these Mallory capacitors, or these type FP capacitors, are extremely important. They're a patented capacitor. They've got a sawtooth-shaped cathode that counteracts the sawtooth ripple that comes out of the AC line, effectively reducing hum. Then for the multi-section capacitor, the shop, I cut the wires off, and he's using more cheap Chinese junk. What should have been a type FP hum reducing high voltage multi-section capacitor. Just pathetic. These things are probably $5 a piece, whereas this is $50 a piece. So pretty sad. Just nothing but off-brand Chinese capacitors. And I see this all too often. I've got stacks and stacks of Brownings in the back room here. And I'm going to say 3 or 4 of them came right from other shops. The owner of this said he wasn't happy with the restoration. People said it didn't sound that good on the air. He'd had it back less than a week. Now I've got it. So here's the Browning Mark II I just got that had quote-unquote been restored, yet it's still got many of the original Browning branded tubes that are over 50 years old. They're old. They're old. And he claims he's aligned it. Why would you align a 50-year-old tube? That's like taking a car into an alignment shop with bald tires. It's got cheap Chinese capacitors in it. Many of the capacitors are the wrong type, wrong value. And here's what we've got. This is supposed to have just been aligned. It sounds absolutely horrible. It sounds like it's got a blown speaker. It's got 2 audio caps. One of them is 10 times the proper value, 47 microfarad instead of 4.7 microfarad. The other one is a 10 microfarad, where it's supposed to have a 4 microfarad capacitor, double the value. Well, Barry, you're right. Your Mark II receiver does sound subpar, and it's not hard to figure out why. As stated, not only is he using the wrong type of capacitors and off-brand, no-name Chinese capacitors, he's also got the wrong value capacitors. Here we've got a 10 microfarad 400 volt capacitor where it's supposed to have a 4 microfarad 150 volt capacitor. So not only is this the wrong type of capacitor, it's over double the design, what Browning had designed the value. It's supposed to be a 4 microfarad capacitor. He's got a 10 microfarad capacitor. I don't know if he's just throwing whatever he had laying around in his junk box in here or what the deal is going on. Maybe he's going senile, blind, because right here we've got another capacitor, cheap, off-brand, no-name Chinese capacitor. This is a 47 microfarad capacitor. The proper value for this radio from Browning is a 4.7 microfarad 50 volt capacitor. So this capacitor is over 10 times what Browning had designed it for. I won't be replacing it with the normal Browning capacitor, I'll be using an Elness Silmac 2 audio capacitor of the proper value, 4.7 microfarad. So yeah, we've got two capacitors here that are totally the wrong value. We've got two capacitors here that are totally the wrong type, that offer zero surge protection or surge capacity. And then, like I said, right here where we've got the very important hum reducing type FP capacitor, he's got these cheap ass Chinese capacitors that have very little surge capacity and no ability to deal with AC hum reduction like these type FPs do with the sawtooth shaped cathode that were specifically designed for reducing hum in tube type sets. So yeah, pretty bad restoration, especially from somebody that claims this is what they do. You know, I could see this coming out of somebody's basement as a wintertime project, but for somebody that claims they're a radio tech, like I say, we're over double the rated value. This is not a power supply. This is an audio capacitor. So going up that high end value is just going to kill all your low frequency response. Like I said, this capacitor here is over 10 times what it's supposed to be. Really bad. Really bad. Also quite alarming is it appears there was no attempt made to align this Collins mechanical filter. They all tend to drift with age. So further inspection of this restoration leads me to believe these controls were never ever treated, as normally when a spray cleaner is used, and the proper spray cleaner for this is Fader Lube F5, by the way, is made for carbon path controls. That's deoxit Fader Lube F5. But had this radio been treated, there's normally some telltale signs. You'll see some dripping, some staining of the chassis, some overspray. I'm not seeing any of that. As a matter of fact, I'm seeing a big layer of dust right here, which is the entry point where you would normally aim the spray lube. So yeah, restoration, my ass. This is a 50-year-old radio. These carbon path controls tend to get noisy, and just like the name says, it's Fader Lube. It also lubes the carbon path to keep it from destroying itself when the wiper is going back and forth. This is as important as changing the tubes or an alignment. These controls are 50 years old, and if they're not properly maintained and lubricated, just like a car engine, they're going to just trash themselves. As mentioned, there's really no evidence of the controls ever having been treated. You know, swabbing around with a fresh Q-tip right underneath the controls, even using a hypodermic syringe, which I oftentimes will use to avoid overspray. You still usually have a drip or so coming out of a control. As you can see, the swab has come back perfect. So yeah, doubtful these controls were ever treated. That could be a good thing, because oftentimes people are using the wrong chemicals on the wrong controls. Best not to use any cleaners or sprays on any of your rotary switches whenever possible on tube radios, as many of them contain high voltage, and even the ones that say non-flammable and whatnot can still create or accelerate arcing, which is a common failure mode of these types of switches. Okay, we're looking at the back of the fine-tuning capacitor with the knob, the fine-tuned knob at 12 o'clock, meaning the hash mark on the knob is at 12 o'clock, pointing straight up and down. Proper factory alignment on a Browning is with this trimmer at half mesh. He had it almost wide open. Factory alignment, my ass. That is half mesh. That is where the knob is supposed to be, in the 12 o'clock position. What this does, it allows you to go up in frequency. It allows you to go down in frequency. The way this technician had your fine-tuning capacitor set, you could go slightly up in frequency and way, way down in frequency. It was all wrong. So that's a 12 o'clock position. I will go ahead and reorient the knob to a 12 o'clock position, And just another faux pas in the worst restoration I've come across. Now here's an issue any good Browning tech is familiar with. This is the Browning ping resistor. It's in series with the ping capacitor. I don't know if you can see it. It's showing a little bulging, some signs of heat. I'm sure it's yielding a pretty gritty sounding Browning ping, and it's definitely due for replacement. I always like to upgrade them with a larger 1 or a 2 watt carbon composition resistor, even when they're not bad. It's just a matter of time before somebody decides to up the ping duration, so adding a higher wattage resistor of the same value is a good preventative measure. So this is something else that I see overlooked all the time. Using some Deoxit D5, not Fader Lube, but Deoxit D5 on this slide switch here, as it's so dirty. I was attempting to get the external speaker work, and of course it wouldn't because there was so much tarnish. Restoration, huh? Blown speaker. Listen to this.
I always believe that.
Good speaker?
Yeah, you'd be surprised what you might see on a camera.
Blown speaker.